Well, good evening, church. Great to see everybody. Glad everybody made it through the rain tonight. One of the things that we want to be a church that is all about is discipleship. You'll hear it in our motto, preach, baptize, and disciple. Every single one of those things are very important in our mission and what we try to do. And so discipleship happens in many different ways. Many of you are involved in different ministries, and discipleship is certainly happening in that. But it is about God using people. And there's a learning process, there's an understanding, but people saying, I want to be used by God. I want to be open to what God has and willing to do what he would have for me. And so I'm excited for tonight because I want to introduce you to one of my friends. And so somebody that God has really been doing a work in his life. And I think we met maybe 3 years ago. Him and his family are faithful here on Saturday night. And he called me one day and said, hey, I just want to talk to you about something. God's really put it in my heart to do something in ministry. I'm not sure what that is, but I feel a call in my life for this. And he's like, when I sit there and I hear people preach, like I'm just stirred up, and he feels like God is saying do more. And so he was like, could you help me with that? How can we start that process? And so Tom and I meet occasionally. We have our Tim Hortons coffee together, and we talk through life and what God's doing in his life and all of those things. And he's also a part of a pastoral eldership class that he is taking on a weekly basis through Flint City Church and Pastor Ernesto. And so throughout this whole process, he's praying, just saying, God, open up avenues and doors. And we want to be a church that is inviting people that are being called by God to be used by God. And so tonight I want to introduce my good friend to you, Tom Tate, who's going to come up and share his story, what God's doing in his life, and then bring a word from the Lord tonight. So Tom, come on up. You guys welcome Tom Tate, please.
Thanks, man. All right, is this thing working? When Scott asked me to do this, I just remember walking away from him and not thinking about what was the message going to be about, or was I going to mess up. I was actually thinking about when I would sit there and the music would be almost over, and then I would walk up on the stage and you would be sitting down, and then I would turn and look at all of you. What would that moment be like? It's terrifying. It is terrifying. If I pass out up here, just read some in Daniel 6, maybe sing a song, go home, and it should all work out just fine. We're going to be in Daniel 6 tonight. We're going to start at chapter 10. But while you're flipping there, I'll just go ahead and tell you a little bit about what's going on in 1 through 9. Daniel is a book about hope, in a sense. The first 6 chapters are about Daniel and his buddies and what they do, and chapters 7 through 12 are more like visions that Daniel had about the future. So, in verses 1 through 9 here, King Darius, who is the king of Medo-Persia, he's set up 120 satraps, and a satrap is basically somebody that collects taxes and does little odds and ends things for the king. And above them, he's appointed 3 governors, and one of those is Daniel. And Daniel's showing the most promise, and he's got the most faith in Daniel, so he puts Daniel in command of the whole kingdom, second in command of the whole kingdom, and that really infuriates the governors and satraps. So they try to dig up some dirt on his life, more or less, something that they can present to King Darius to kind of get Daniel out of his favor, and they don't find anything. So they turn to the one thing that Daniel does have, which is pretty evident, and that's his faith. So they come up with a decree that for 30 days there's to be no worshiping of any gods or kings other than Darius. And they present it to Darius, King Darius, and he signs it, and it's a law. So we'll pick up at verse 10. It says, "Now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber he had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den?" The king replied, "The statement is true, according to the law of Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked." So go back to verse 10, and halfway through it, it starts and it says, "And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God as he had been doing previously." Daniel's not doing anything different today than he did yesterday, or the day before that, or that he'll probably do tomorrow. Knowing that lions are coming, right? If he's worshiping his God, he's worshiping Jesus, they're going to throw him in the lion's den. He doesn't do anything different than he did yesterday. And sometimes that's being bold. Tonight's sermon is about boldness. But that's sometimes a method of being bold when you maintain your faith in the midst of persecution. And there's many forms of persecution. There can be persecution from work, from your neighbors. There can be persecution from your family even. And the same goes with opposition. They run hand in hand, but you can get it from the same things: neighbors, family, work, friends, and Satan, most of all. I've noticed that when you aren't really doing much damage to him, when you're just living a normal life and going about your day-to-day and Jesus isn't the center focal point of your day, that Satan kind of leaves you alone. I mean, he still picks at you, but he does like bumper bowling with you a little bit. He just keeps you in the lane, drives you right off a cliff at some point. But it's the ones that are on fire for God, the ones that are doing something meaningful, they're a light, and he can't stand that. So I like to think of it as like a kid in the backyard on a summer night, in the backyard, and they're catching fireflies. What do you do when you're trying to catch fireflies? You're looking for the light, and you're grabbing it, right? Satan does the same thing with us. As soon as he sees it, he's trying to catch you, and he's trying to put you out. He's done it to me throughout this whole past month. Ever since Pastor Scott, dropped a bomb on my life and asked me to come up here tonight and do this, it seemed like most of the times in the morning, like the second I would open my eyes, I would just instantly have this thought of, you can't do it. And it increasingly got more intense up until today. I didn't feel it one single bit. And that is God. That's not me at all. So I'll tell you guys a little story. When I was 18 years old, I left Columbus, joined the Navy, and I flew to Chicago O'Hare Airport. And I got on a bus. They took me to boot camp, and they took all of our stuff, all the clothes I had on, took it off, put it in a box, everything, wallet, watch, phone. I don't even know if I took my phone, but, and they mailed it home. They gave me their clothes. And then they sat us down and they told us what the next 3 months would look like. And the one thing that we had to ourselves was Sundays from 10 to 11:30. There was chapel if you wanted to go to it. And I just remember being like, yeah, I'm going to go do that. Not only was it something I did growing up, but it didn't sound like they could, mess with me or do much to me during that hour and a half. So I was okay with that. But the second they left the room, there was a very negative tone to going to it. And, just battle, you can imagine battle-hardened stuff and just guys and egos. And so I didn't go, and I didn't go for like almost a month. But then one day I decided, enough with this. These aren't my forever friends, not like it mattered, but I'm going to go. So on base, anytime you leave a building, you have to march there. So I decided that I was going. So I left 15 minutes early, and I marched from the barracks to the chapel. And then I marched back. And nobody said anything to me about it, really, and I never said anything to them. And that went on for a few weeks. And then about a month into me going to the chapel, I noticed that there was a guy behind me marching. and we didn't talk much really, but not about going to chapel. But by the end of boot camp, 3 months, so there was another month probably after when I started, or 2 months after, but a month after I started noticing people, there was probably 4 or 5 of us going consistently. And that, tonight, anything I say is not me bragging, it's all God. So he gave me the opportunity to be bold in that situation, all I had to do was march and go get some time to myself. I mean, he wasn't asking a lot, but he did all the work after that. And it was to his glory. So let's pick up with Daniel again, and we'll get back into the story here. We're going to start on 16, verse 16. I know I skipped some. All we're really missing here is that the satraps or the governors, they go to Darius and they say, "We know you love him. We know he's your buddy, but he broke the law and he needs to go into the lion's den." It says, "Then the king gave orders." And Daniel was brought and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you." A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. I went back and forth in my practices on whether or not I was going to put this next part in there, and I'm just going to do it. I think it's funny that when, in this little verse here, it says that no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him, right? And he spent the night fasting. Daniel at this point knows God, right? He's been through enough with him. And he knows that if the lions didn't rip him apart in the first 30 seconds of being in that cave, that he probably had a pretty good chance of surviving the night, I would think. So I think you could almost say that Daniel slept okay. Probably not great, but okay. And I think it's interesting that King Darius decides that he's not going to eat or have any entertainment, and he sleeps horribly. I don't know, I just think that's ironic. Moving on here, let's see. Then the king arose at dawn at the break of day and went in haste to the lion's den. When he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel spoke to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut up the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him. And also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime." Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he trusted God. Which goes back to, he trusted God, giving your boldness to God. I mean, you can, as soon as you accept that you want to be emboldened in your faith, you want to be assertive, that's really the end of your part of it, because he'll give it to you after that, and then he'll give you the strength to do it. Comfort zones are huge when it comes to boldness. You got to be willing to go out of your comfort zone and try new things. I'll tell you, Scott kind of mentioned my process a little bit. He actually took a segment right out of my sermon here, but that's okay. He and I did meet, but before that, I was sitting in church one night, and Wes was going nuts, like he does sometimes, and I just remember being like charged up, totally charged up, and I had a piece of paper in my Bible, and I wrote in it, "I know what I want to do," and my wife writes, "What's that?" ? And I never answered her in church because I wasn't about to write a book in the middle of the service. So we get in the car and we're heading home, and I told her I had no idea in what capacity I was going to do it, and I still don't. But by the end of that night, I signed up to go to Colorado Christian, and I think I have 5 classes left until I have my associate's degree in biblical studies. And it wasn't a few weeks after that, that night that I signed up, that I'm meeting with Scott. We're getting some coffee, we're talking, and he's just kind of figuring me out. College was a comfort zone, believe it or not. I mean, my wife is amazing, and she does far more than I do. But with having 4 children, and well, at the time there wasn't one coming, but that's a step of your comfort zone. You know, when you take on more and you already have a lot. Scott sent me to elder training, and there was a lot of guys there that I didn't know. I barely knew Ernesto, and you have to meet with them and share personal things with them and preach in front of them. That was a comfort zone. And then I wouldn't call it a step. I'd call it more of like an elevator ride. But I went from 7 guys at Ernesto's elder training to a Saturday night at the Rock. That was another level of comfort that I exited. But it's all about, boldness is about being a doer, right? And not a listener. It's okay to listen. It's definitely okay to listen. That's where you learn. This all started for me from listening. But you got to get out there and be a doer at some point. Brooke and I recently, my wife Brooke and I decided recently that we were going to be beekeepers. And so we've been going to classes. We went to a class in the spring. I think it was the spring. And when there's experts there and people that know what they're doing, you start to get confidence. You're like, yeah, if anything happens, if anything comes up, or if there's something I don't know, or if the bees start going crazy, then, you guys got it. I can just kind of back off because it's kind of a serious thing, and you probably don't want me helping. So, but when it came to bringing the bees home, and you have thousands of little stingers in that box, you start to really wish you'd have listened more in those classes, because it's time to do and it's not time to listen. And it's the same thing with your faith. You can listen and get quite a bit out of a Saturday night or a Sunday morning, but you have to do something with it after you leave. Wes has said quite often, I shouldn't say quite often, in several sermons that he is an introvert who has an extrovert's job. And that's okay. Obviously, you are who you are. It's okay to admit that you're this or that you're that. But I think he does a great job of being an extrovert, or trying to be, and that's what faith is you can be who you are, but at the end of the day, if you need to kind of get out. You need to kind of get out of your skin a little bit, out of your normal zones, and be willing to jump into the deep end a little bit of the craziness. When it comes to getting out of your depth, I was trying to figure out who in the Bible would be a good example of getting out of your depth. Like, who took on something that they would have never imagined, something that they weren't ready for. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Josiah, but he's an 8-year-old boy who one day is just an 8-year-old boy, and then the very next day, he's a king of Israel. And his dad and his grandpa before him were both evil men, very evil men. They didn't worship God. They never listened to God. They had idols that you were allowed to worship. And Josiah, when he takes over, smashes it all down, day one. Takes the idols and turns them to dust. So with Josiah, though, to go from to be an 8-year-old boy and you could just spend 8 years not doing anything, just taking over on cruise control. Josiah kind of takes the bull by the horns from day one, smashes everything down. He's out of his depth. God gives him the strength, and he does it. And it probably costed him something, I would imagine, with his family or with success, possibly, because boldness will cost you something. One way or another, it will always cost you something. It could cost you a position at work. You could lose a relationship with a family member. There's always something that's going to come up when you take a leap of faith. But that's okay, because there's a positive to it too. I mean, look at what you're doing. Just the thought of pleasing God that's why we're here. That's why any of us are here tonight. I mean, a part of it could be for our salvation too, but it should be to please God. And it's important that when we think about what it's going to cost us, that we don't shy away from what we're trying to do. Because many of us have seen miracles in our life. I mean, the other night, my wife and I were at a Meijer, and you see a rainbow it was the biggest rainbow I've ever seen, and it was clear from end to end, and there was 2 of them. Sunsets, people's lives. You see people, you see the impact that happens in people's lives. Judas in the Bible, one of the disciples, he got to see the feeding of the 5,000. He got to see Jesus calm a storm, and he got to see Lazarus raised from the dead. He got to see all those great, wonderful things. I don't want to say they're greater than things that, not to say that there's a scale, but I would imagine those things are pretty impressive compared to the things that we see in our lifetime today. And he still turned on God. So it's important that we remind ourselves, that when we're doing this and things get tough, and Satan is getting at you in the morning telling you that you're probably not going to succeed at this, that you don't shy away, that you're not scared of the things that you might lose, and that you think about what God has given you, and that he has the strength to push you through it. I got hurt in November of last year. I broke my leg, and I started thinking instantly when I fell about my job, money, health insurance, because we had just found out a couple weeks before that we were expecting. Christmas was coming because it was November, and you start to just have all these thoughts about the worst. And God came through with every one of those things and some. I mean, everything was covered within weeks. Everything, we knew everything was going to be okay within weeks. God does crazy, amazing things all the time, and we see it. And it's important that we just remember that. We remember why we're trying to do what we're doing, why we're stepping out on a leap of faith. When we do try to pull away or retreat or just give it to somebody else, you remember that power and those stories, and that's what should push us through to want to see and do and be a part of more amazing things. And with those things that we'll lose, it's important to remember that God's gonna help you. He'll always help you. Daniel didn't do this knowing that he was going to be saved. I guarantee you, he did not know that for 100% certainty he wasn't going to get eaten in that cave. He was willing to die for his faith. Is God always going to save us from things? No, probably not. But he's always going to be there to help us in some way, in whatever way he thinks we need help with. If you guys turn to Psalm 28, verse 7 real quick, we'll take a little look at something here. Psalm 28, 7. It says, "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart exalts, and with my song I shall thank him." My heart, what's it say? My heart trusts in him, and I am helped. If you trust in him, if you give it to him, he will help you every time. The last thing I would say about getting along in this journey is that God is definitely the most important component when it comes to where you get your strength from, how you get through tough times. But we as a body need to rely on each other too. We need to surround ourselves in church, obviously, and out in the real world with Christ followers. We've had some, in my own personal life, we've had some friends or some family members that struggle, and if you need to be careful about what kind of guidance you listen to, what kind of instruction you take in to apply to your life. It's important that you apply that knowledge and that strength from Christ-following people. If you surround yourself with Christ-following people, Proverbs 27:17 says that iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. It's up to us to sharpen each other, to be bold together, to feed off of each other's boldness, and to go fight that spiritual war that we all need to fight. At some point, we need to. If we're serious about why we're here, we need to sharpen each other so that we can go out and do that. When I was growing up, I had a pastor at a church called Buckeye Christian Church, and he would always say that the right thing is often the hardest thing. This probably doesn't apply to 100% of situations, but I would assume that it applies to most, that if you have a situation and you have multiple outcomes or multiple paths you can take, the hardest one is probably the necessary one. And it's just time that we all get in the fight, that we take what we've learned here, what charges us up, and we go out there and we get into that spiritual war that I was just talking about, that we go out and we fight together because Satan is trying to take us out. And while we sit in here or while we go through life lukewarm, he's trying to capture the light and he's trying to put it out. When I talk about getting in the fight, this popped in my head every time. And eventually I thought, you know what, I'm just going to put it in. I'm going to take a swing, and if I miss, then it is what it is. But there used to be a movie called Top Gun. Well, there still is a movie, but it's an old movie. If you're 25 or under, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. Watch it. It's a good movie. It is in color. It's got Tom Cruise in it, and he's a backup. We're at the end of the movie. He's a backup pilot, and he is called in to a battle because his buddy Iceman is surrounded by Russian MiGs, and they're having a huge fight, and it's just Iceman by himself. So Maverick takes off, and he goes into the fight, flies through one of their jet washes, and he freaks out. He has to get out of the fight because he lost his buddy Goose in a training flight doing the same thing, flying through a jet wash. So he needs a moment. He's flying away from the battle, and his buddy in the back seat, Merlin, I think was his name, he's saying, what are you doing? We got to get back in there. We got to get back in the fight. Iceman needs us. Maverick, get back in the fight. It's the same thing as what's going on in the world right now. There's people out there fighting the fight, and we're all, I'm guilty of it, and I'm sure there's other guilty people out there that aren't in the fight. They're not engaged. They're not stepping out on a limb, going out of your comfort zone. You're not getting out of your depth. It's time that we do these things. We deal with persecution and opposition, and we go serve God. With that, I'll go ahead and pray and close this message out. We kind of got there. Dear Lord, thank you for tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to do this. Thank you for everything that you've done in my life that's gotten me to this point. I just want to ask that you'll speak to someone tonight about where they're at in their faith and what they need to do moving forward. I just pray that they learn that it's okay to step out on a leap of faith. It's okay to be out of your comfort zone. Those are the times when you lean on him the most. There's a song, you guys might hear it here in the near future. There's a lyric in it that says, I find my strength, I find my hope, I find my help in you alone, Lord. When fear ascends and darkness falls, I find my peace in you alone. Let us find our strength and our hope, our help and our peace in you, Lord. Thank you for everything that we have. In your name, amen.